Right. Hello, lovely listeners. Today I have the wonderful Lair Torrent. Lair, I have to say, has got an awesome voice and amazing tattoos. So we might talk about them in a bit. But Lair is an expert in relationships, and he's recently written a book on the subject. He was born into abject poverty himself, to a 15-year-old mother. Wow, she was really young. So Lair never experienced true love and connection growing up. And but now in his personal life, as well as in the lives of the couples he works with, Lair has created the thing he never knew growing up, which sounds amazing. You're a leading marriage and family therapist, and the book is called The Practice of Love.
That's correct.
You're also a psychotherapist. That is something that I thought I was going to do after uni, and I taught myself out of self-imposter syndrome or whatever. You're a consultant and also a speaker, and Lair's just been telling me he's just done a speaking gig, so it's fresh from that. But you like to blend the Eastern-based mindfulness practices with the Western clinical models, and I think in retrospect, for me, that's probably why I didn't go into psychotherapy, because I'm very on the Eastern side, whereas obviously you've got a nice blend of that. So ultimately, you're all about giving your clients back their control in their lives, which is, after my own heart, being a coach myself, it's all about empowering people to live their best lives, isn't it? So welcome. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
See, I told you his voice was cool.
It's my morning Alec Baldwin voice. That's what it is.
That's it, yeah.
Yeah.
So Lair, I'd love, and the listeners would love, I always love the backstories of people, like, 15-year-old mom. Wow, that is incredibly young. And what that sort of felt like for you, and just anything you feel called to share, any pivotal moments, how you went from abject poverty to becoming, the success that you are now, and anything in between. So over to you.
Man, that's a long and circuitous route for sure, but I'll try to make it in brief. Yeah. So my mom had me at 15, was unceremoniously kicked out of school, because that's what they did to girls back then. I was put in foster care. I didn't include that in my bio. Right. It was only for 4 months, but if I'm honest, I think that probably holds a large part of my pre-verbal trauma that I deal with as an adult. I was then somehow given back to her. I don't know when or who at the state decided that she was suddenly a fit mother, or that the house that she lived in was okay enough to bring a child home to. But, we had no heat, no running water, no electricity in upstate New York. It was a very pragmatic, very practical upbringing. And my great grandmother, who was around a lot at the time, was famous for speaking in bumper sticker. And she used to say things like, "We haven't got time nor money for tears." And so that denoted the practicality of the upbringing. Practicality rules the day when you don't actually know where your next meal is coming from. And, so I come from very hardworking stock. I come from incredibly strong women. And, my mom would hitchhike 20 miles back and forth, quite literally, because you could do that back then, I suppose, to get to school, to get her associate's degree. And eventually we made it out of that house into an apartment, which was in, it was not the best neighborhood. And we were not welcome in that neighborhood by any stretch. And so it was a long story long. I did not see a lot of connected, loving romance in my life, because that wasn't practical. But I did see it on the movies, on the TV. I heard about it in songs, and I was like, that seems far better than what I've seen. I would prefer that. Right. And so I think I became kind of an incurable romantic. I used sports to get me top-notch education. And eventually, when I realized I wasn't going to be playing in the National Hockey League, I moved to New York City. I became an actor, which I think was, and I was an actor between New York and Los Angeles, and did a bunch of different things. When I finally came to grips with the notion that is that was just a huge ego stroke and really a manifestation of my own wounding, my own core wounding of not feeling like I was enough playing out. And so, of course, if you look at my big pie head on a movie screen or pay to see me in anything, then of course I'm enough, right? And once I came to that understanding, I went to my bookshelf and I looked at it. And there was about 7 or 8 books on acting. There was about 40 or 50 books on self-help, healing, the mind, spirit, all of that sort of thing. And so I essentially quit. I made an about face and decided to not follow the egoic path, but to follow what I would consider to be my soul's path. And went to the Helix training program in New York, which was a 4-year eclectic, hardcore, don't ask any clients to walk their path if you're not willing to walk yours.
How long ago was this? Sorry.
That's okay. That was in oh God. I think we graduated in 07. So it's been a bit. My wife and I both went. She was my girlfriend at the time. And it was an eclectic training program, blending Eastern, Western, South American, Peruvian shamanism. It was like going to Hogwarts.
Wow.
Yeah, it was wild. And that was founded by 5 women back in the 70s who said, psychotherapy is kind of bullshit. And it's not including some really important pieces and like spirituality, not white guy with a white beard riding on a white cloud spirituality, but like spirituality where it's like I might have a direct line to my own divinity kind of spirituality. And so I went there and I realized, and I think maybe you could attest to this too, that like it can be a much harder road to building a client base often when you don't have that clinical background. That can often be difficult because people know what they're searching when they're looking for a therapist. And so I went back to school. I also knew that it would probably be a gateway to a book. It would be a gateway to speaking to larger groups of people. So I went and reluctantly got my clinical education and licensure. And in retrospect, I'm glad I did it. And so here I sit.
Yeah. So you were acting, and then you said you looked at the books on the shelf, and then you did an about turn. Was there anything else around that time that sort of, was it a feeling within you that it's just something ain't right here, for you to make such a dramatic change and then obviously have to go back to school?
Yeah, I think flow, right? Like the idea of flow, I wasn't experiencing a ton of flow in my life. And I felt like, the narrative I've always had from my background is I'm the poor kid from the wrong side of the tracks. I'm the dumb kid from the back of the class trying to make good. And I had done a lot of my personal work at that point when I decided to quit acting. And I was like, some of this shit's got to be getting easier. Maybe I'm choosing the wrong path. And so we had this guided meditation in school, and the guided meditation took me into the underworld, this cave, and I was presented with this walking stick that had a map on it. And the map, it looked like a Y. And I realized it was a map. And the person who gave it to me said, he pointed to one of the tines, one of the roads on the map off of the Y, and he said, "You're here. You should be here." He pointed to the other road. He goes, "The space between these 2 roads, that's your suffering." And it was kind of at that moment when I was like, all right, I need to get back. And then I realized, there's the Native American view of the red and black path, the red and black road, the road of spirituality, of connectedness, of authenticity. And I realized I wasn't on the authentic path. I was on the egoic path. I was going, and spirit kind of came to me and said, "Look, you can beat your head into this brick wall and continue doing it, and you'll have a modicum of success, of course, here and there, and you can live for those moments, or you can do what you've come here to do." That was sort of the message thing that I had gotten through my personal work of meditation.
And when were you always spiritual, or was that something that came along later?
My grandmother was Catholic. And so by osmosis, I inherited all that Catholic shame and guilt and like,
Got that. Yeah.
yeah, it's like somehow you're like, I don't know, I think I should. So I read the Bible like 3 times because I wanted to be sure that I was right, that it ain't all in there, and that's not what this is about. There was something always kind of burning in my heart to know more, to know myself beyond the flesh and blood that I think that you see sitting in front of you. And I have never, I was never really able to put words to it. There wasn't a lot of, so I dove into self-help, and I got the Tony Robbins program back in the day, and started there. I was always kind of a spiritual kid. I was always sort of connected to something more. There were plenty of anecdotes that I could bore you with of me going to my mom and, having this clairvoyant experience and foretelling the future, and her saying to me, "Where did you see that?" I said, "A little cloud in my head." So there's always been some piece for me that I've been connected to something a little bit larger. And now I'm married to a woman who's not only a therapist, but a straight up medium. Speaks to dead people on the regular. So that's fun.
Where did you meet her? Because you said you both went to school together,
Yeah.
or yeah. So,
Yeah.
where did you meet her?
I
How
met her
did
at
that happen?
I met her at a dirty, filthy bar. Um,
Cool.
yeah, no, I was coming in because I was a bartender in New York for forever. That's how I paid my way through everything. And I walked into my job that day, went downstairs to get my drawer of money and towels, and there was this young lady being interviewed for a waitressing gig. And she looked up at me, and I looked at her, and our eyes met. And I shit you not, I looked at her and I said, "There you are." As if I had been marching across, time and space all this time to finally find this person. Yeah.
Because you said growing up, you became like a bit of a romantic because it was something that was
Yeah.
missing. So,
Mm-hmm.
presumably, had you had some kind of relationships prior to that? And this was, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah.
And
As a matter of fact, I
obviously,
was deep in one. I
oh,
was engaged to
okay.
somebody else.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And I looked up at I was downstairs. I looked up at the dirty floor of the bar. It was the ceiling. And I said, "Really? Really? Could not be more inconvenient." But yeah. And there was something in me that just knew that, and I'm not sure everybody gets this, like I know that I'll never walk across Oscar's stage and I'll never sip from Lord Stanley's cup. But, I got this. I got to be able to look at this person and go, "Wow, that's you. I've been looking for you the whole time." And so here we are 21 years later, 2 kids in.
And did she feel the same, or was hers different?
I don't know. I don't think so. I think she humors me and says, "No, it was, I thought you were kidding." Her response was, she
Yeah.
looked at me and she was like, "Okay." That she says quite candidly, she says, "I thought you could see my panties." And I just was like, "Run, don't walk from this dude." And we became friends, but I mean, I kind of always had a little, I knew, I was like, and I tried to fight it, but it was a thing.
Yeah.
Couldn't fight it.
Can't fight it. No.
Yeah, no.
So you went to this slightly off the wall, by the sounds of it, 4 years
Yeah.
of education.
Bloodletting.
How did you find out about that? Was that, you said your wife's a therapist now? She wasn't a
Mm-mm.
therapist then, I
Mm-mm.
guess.
No, no.
So how did you find out about this place?
So she was seeing a rather terrible therapist at the time. And as a matter of fact, I went to a therapy session with her, and my wife was talking about her borderline mother and her traumatic upbringing. And the woman leaned back in her chair and said, "Sometimes I wish I had the sign above my head that said they did the best they could." And I looked at her and I said, "That's the shit you're going to tell her?" And I looked at my wife and I said, "I shouldn't tell you this, but you need a new therapist." And this woman had pamphlets for this training program in her in her waiting room. And so Ash said, "I'm going to go to the meetup for this." And I went only because I was like, well, I'm not going to let you join a cult. And that's what I thought it probably was. And before the thing was out, I was like, this is pretty cool. These people are dialed in and they know what they're talking about. They're doing something that no one else is doing. And consequently, I mean, I like to say the Helix training program, all humility aside, I think they graduated Jedi, a form of therapist that incorporates the mind, the body, and the soul. You just find yourself being able to ask questions in a way that, and create a space, a holding space for clients that I know for a fact I would not have that, and I would not have the career, the practice or the connection to my clients that I have, had it not been for those folks that taught us there. Yeah.
Mm. And so when you went through that and you graduated, what came next? Was it as easy as, right, I'm a therapist now and I've got my clients, or what happened next?
No, man, you just run around. I got 3 in one day. I feel like a real therapist, trying to find office space. So I found out the apartment above ours in New York City, and our walk up was essentially available for like sublet. And so I subletted that, and I turned it into 2 practice spaces and used the kitchen as the waiting room. It was so like, cobbled together New York style, but I was able to afford to practice there, and I was able to afford for many of my peers who couldn't afford their own space. We created this collective, and it was an amazing place. And we had a supervisory group that we would meet, once or twice a month, and it was a really beautiful thing that we had created beyond school.
And your wife practiced there as well, did she?
She did, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And what sort of people came to you? Was it a specific kind of person, or was it just anyone and everyone?
Mainly artists. My practice was in the East Village. I was a former actor, and I ended up getting one Broadway dancer. This one Broadway dancer. And the thing you don't know about Broadway dancers is they talk about their therapists like they talk about their hairstylists or their acupuncturists, right? Like, you get one, you get 40. And so the floodgates opened. I got really lucky. Wow. And so I became sort of therapist to Broadway to maybe that's overstated, but I had a ton of them, and continue to get a ton of them. And so, it was really, and it was good too, because here I had been an actor, and all of them to a person would say, it's so great that I don't have to tell you why I have an anxious avoidant attachment to my agent and why that's a real thing. And that it feels like a high school relationship, and that you understand why that's important. And so I really understood the business. So that helped me. And of course, word of mouth, and my practice was ended up being what it is now.
So when did it sort of start to change towards more relationship based?
I went to my internship, right? I went to this, again, surrounded by women. I was the only man at this practice, but I even my agents now, all women, my book agents, all women. So I gravitate to that power. And so I go to this internship. I wanted this one really badly. It was a really good one. And she sat me down and she said, so tell me about your ideal client. And I said, and I hadn't even thought about it. And I just kind of off the rip said, I think I want to work with couples. That seems really cool to me. Like, that seems hard in a really good way. And she's like, great, because we all hate working with couples, so we're going to give them all to you. And they did. And so they filled my practice with couples, and I killed it. I was crushing it. My couples loved me. I loved them. We were speaking non-violently, we were validating, we were de-escalating the couple cycle. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse was riding through on a daily basis. These folks were glad handing me, high-fiving, backslapping, hugging me on the way out the door. And as I like to say, with only a little dramatic flair, that shit was going off the rails before they got to the elevator ranks in my building, right? Before they got to the car, they were not able to sustain what we had created in the room.
Oh, really?
And so, yeah, so I went to my supervisors, I went to my colleagues, I went to my peers, and I told them about my experience. And to a person, they all said the same thing. They said, welcome to couples therapy. And I said, surely that can't be the answer. And I had an ace up my sleeve, and this woman named Dr. Evan Ember Black, and she was the head of the Ackerman Institute for the Family in New York. She was the editor of Family Process magazine. She had written a bunch of books in the genre, and she was my mentor at school. And so I went to her and I said, this has been my experience. What are your thoughts? And she said, welcome to couples therapy. And I said, you don't get that answer. Not you. I said, you've been on Oprah. She said, I've been on Oprah twice. And I said, right. So you don't get that answer. And I think in a fit of frustration to get me out of the office, she said, well, just create something of your own. And I said, you can do that? And she said, well, yeah. And to this day, I don't think she actually thought I would do it. But then I was sort of like, okay, I'm going to make something. And I read the work of Dr. Alvin Simrod, a Harvard professor and forefather of modern psychology. And he said, let your clients be your textbooks. And that gave me license. That gave me a real license to go, okay, I don't have to listen to so much of this shit that everyone else has already created. I can go here and find out what they need. And so I went on this sort of sojourn of trying to figure out what my clients needed, but I was also had my ear to the ground of my life and sort of wasn't just noticing things. And I was allowing inspiration to come from other places other than just relationships or textbooks. And I started cobbling together this way of working. And I brought in, first and foremost, mindfulness, Eastern thought. Because without self-awareness, how are you to change any of your habits, right?
Totally.
Yeah. So I started training my people not in like, let's work on your relationship. Let's work on you getting into your feelings, dropping into your body, knowing what you're thinking, getting out of your reactions. And so very, very quickly, my couples were de-escalated outside of the therapy room because they had this tool. They could take this breath, they could titrate the nervous system, right? They had this very, very user-friendly, very easy tool to use called mindfulness. And I would tell them, this is so easy that if you're not doing it, it's because you don't want to. And if you don't want to, that's another track in therapy, not this one. And that was my first practice for the book and for my methodology.
So when did you start writing the book?
You know, that's an interesting question, like pen to paper.
Yeah.
A couple of years ago, but I've been collecting for years, you know, like, oh, and so in the talk that I just gave, this version of the talk, it's sort of a story of how these practices, the 5 practices that are in my book of mindfulness, parts of self, narrative, choosing, and personal responsibility, where they all came from. And so, you know, I was collecting anecdotes. I was collecting inspirational stories from people that showed me that, like, oh no, this is important. Parts work is important. The story we tell about our partners is really important because our thoughts affect our feelings. Feelings become our beliefs. How we love each other beyond Chapman's love languages and what's below the waterline on that, which is our core wounding. You know, that these ideas took many years to flesh out, and my book also sort of lives as a bibliography of the books that I've read over the years that have sort of inspired this work.
Cool. So obviously it's a lifetime of evidence, information, experiences that have obviously gone into this book, which is makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
In terms of you creating your own, so when that lady almost gave you permission to then go and do your own thing because you weren't happy with that's couples therapy, there's got to be something better than that. What did that look like? What, you know, when you suddenly thought, oh right, so I can do my own thing here, what did that look like?
Well, for me, it was sort of like, okay, so if I'm going to listen to my couples and hear what they need, what am I hearing? And how can I dive below the, like, I felt like couples therapy was skimming off the surface. Oh, we have communication problems. How do we still have communication problems? And so what I realized is that through different investigation is that couples don't actually have communication issues. They think they do. And that's boilerplate. And I get calls almost daily. We have communication problems. And to those people, I will say, you do not actually have communication problems. And they'll say, Lair, we've been to the house. We know we can't communicate. And I'll say, you don't. You articulated the fact that you have communication problems to me just fine, which means you can speak the English language. What you have, what I end up finding out is you have a parts of self problem. The part of us, the part of you that's showing up to these conversations, that's actually what's at issue. All right. And so this diving down below the surface of this thing, like the top 10 things you can search on the internet of why couples are looking for couples therapy or breaking up, those are symptoms. You're wiping the nose from the cold. There's a virus in there, right? And for couples communication, it's how you show up, the side of yourself that shows up. If there's a side of you in the shared circle of that conversation that's trying to create distance, and you're thinking, I want to create closeness, how the fuck is that going to work? Because when you're in the wrong part of self and you're trying to use an I statement as an example, like what I think I heard you say becomes, what the fuck did you just say to me, very, very quickly, right? When you're trying to protect yourself. And so we dive below the surface and we notice that those parts play such a huge role in how we connect or how we don't connect. And people come to me and they're like, well, it's just not there. It was here in the beginning, but I don't know where it is. I'm not even sure what it is, and I want you to find it, but it's gone. And so that's a very surfacey thing. We don't know how to connect that passion, that spark is gone. So I actually found this in an old couple on a train, and the story's in the book. It's a fun story about this elderly couple, and they were still in love. I thought it was new love. I thought they'd found themselves in the retirement community. Their love was 63 years old. And when I asked the guy, I said, what's your secret? He didn't say vows. He didn't say we did it for the kids. He didn't say we did it for God. He didn't talk about the sanctity of marriage. What he told me is no matter what happened, and a lot did over the course of 63 years, I always told myself how lucky I was to be with this woman. And so I started diving into narrative. The stories that we tell ourselves are so potent. They're so important. We just don't think they are because we have so many thoughts on any given day. We have 60,000 thoughts. So they're just throwaway. And so if I think you're a stupid shit for 5 minutes, no big deal. But if I proliferate that, if I foment that narrative about my partner, then what we are doing is we are mentally rehearsing to fall out of love. And so when couples are missing the it factor, I want to know the story you're telling in your head when no one else is listening about that partner. And you'll see them go, oh, and I'll go, no, say it out loud. And I do it separately because you can't unhear stuff, and so I get them to say it out loud, and I run it through this. Is that fair? Is it compassionate? Is it empathetic? And so we work to reauthor a new, perhaps more truthful, more fair, more loving narrative. And so that's how it looked. It was like hearing the thing that was the symptom, and then, okay, what's underneath that? Yeah.
So presumably you, as you just said, then you would separate them. So they would have their own individual sessions to be able to speak that
out
without
loud,
yeah,
hurting anybody.
Yeah.
I learned my lesson the hard way.
Yeah, you can't take it back. So well, you can't, the other person can't unhear it. That's the problem.
Yeah.
So when you started to do that, the nature of what you were seeing when those couples left or those individuals left started to shift.
You mean after I started using the new methodologies?
Yeah.
No, I started making my job obsolete.
Right.
Like that. And that's the odd thing as a couples therapist. Like if I'm doing my job well, I'm not going to have a job with you for very long, hopefully.
Yeah.
It's a strange way to look at it. But yeah, if I'm doing my job well, I'm making my job obsolete. And that's what I was seeing. I was seeing couples get traction. The other thing is I saw them getting traction and leaving therapy too early, right? And this is why I called the book The Practice of Love, right? Love has fallen into the bin of things that we think we should just know how to do well, and the numbers support the fact that we actually don't. And I also wanted people to start thinking about love and relationships as something you want to do well, right? So if you want to hit a good backhand in tennis, if you want to learn a new language, what do? You spend time, energy, maybe some money, and you focus on that thing and you do it. And so you want to do that thing well. I think relationships should be the same. You should be able to say, I love my partner so well, I could list it on my resume under special skills. And if you can't, then you got some work to do. And so these couples were leaving and then quickly coming back. And so I didn't cover the fourth practice, but that aside, I had to come up with a fifth practice at that point, which was personal responsibility. And it's a little dash of stoicism, I guess. I like to say stoicism is really Buddhism with a mohawk and a few tattoos. But it allowed me to put my shoulder into these couples and say, you need to practice the first 4 practices. You need to take responsibility for your mindfulness. You need to take responsibility for your narrative. You need to take responsibility for your parts and how you love that person, how you choose that person every day, all the time. If you don't, you're practicing badly. And by the way, you also need to own everything that comes out of your mouth, everything you do and everything you say. 100% responsibility on both sides. And when I finally had that 5th practice in place, then it was sort of this thing that sort of fell back in. It was recursive, and it was a cohesive sort of unit that people could work with, a bag of tools that were, I think, simple enough to be used when couples are triggered, sophisticated enough to actually meet their needs and the problems that they face.
And what is the 5th one? Sorry if I've missed that.
Personal responsibility.
Personal responsibility, yeah.
Which is essentially just own your crap. Own it. Act like an adult.
Yeah.
Stop pointing the finger. And that's a tough one though, right? That's the jagged little pill. People don't want that one. It's not the one that I put on the front of the website, because no one would come. And so when I offer it and say, you need to own your shit, and they're like, you're asking me to be too permissive. You're asking me to give up ground. I said, I'm not asking you to give up ground. I'm actually asking you to take the higher ground, and you're fighting me on it. You're fighting your own emotional intelligence by not owning your stuff. You think standing here and pointing the finger and trying to foist blame onto him or her, trying to argue for the victim position, is somehow going to make you victorious. So you want to win? Well, yeah. Why would you want to win? If you love this person, why would you want them to lose at anything? Because if they lose, you lose. And that's the truth of personal responsibility in a relationship. If they lose, you lose. And if you love somebody, why the frig would you want them to lose that? And people are often like, well, I never really thought about it like that. I'm like, maybe you should.
That's amazing. I've got this saying that I say to my partner, it's pretty lonely up in the right tree, isn't it?
Isn't it?
Exactly. And I say, would you rather be right or would you rather be happy? And that was a saying that sort of came across my lap probably a couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago, something like that.
It's a good one.
And it is, because we're so bloody stubborn in our own, you know, I'm the one that's been hurt. I'm the one that's right. You know, listen to me. And it's bollocks, because everybody's got their own perspective, and especially in relationships, especially when there's more and more time and experiences and events between you. And yeah, if you can't, like, and I love what you just said, you know, by being right, they are wrong and they are the loser. You're the winner, they're the loser. Why would you want the person you love to be the loser? That makes no sense whatsoever.
The booby prize.
Yeah.
It's the booby prize. Yeah. And I tell people all the time, I'm like, look, Frost had a poem that inspired some of this work, right? He said, I came upon two roads in a wood one day, and I took the one less traveled by. And the way he finished that line is he said, and it made all the difference, right? And it made all the difference. And I tell my clients all the time, I'm like, look, the personal responsibility is not for the faint of heart. It to the ego, it feels like a death. It's akin to blame, which is akin to shame, but it is the road less traveled, and it will make all of the difference. Because when you endeavor to take personal responsibility, you stop arguing for the victim position, you stop trying to win, you end up making the space between you and your partner a safer one, right? You're saying, I got me. I'm not going to try and blame you. I'm not going to try to foist all the responsibility of what just went down onto you. I'm going to own my shit. And you can say, oh, look at that. There's an emotionally intelligent adult in the room, and I'm asking you to meet me in this place. And so the space between us becomes a safe one, where we can actually then, and only then, can we really get into our vulnerabilities.
Yeah, that's really reminiscent of a conversation I've recently had, actually. Like I was saying to you before we hit record that you talk about trauma. I was watching some of your stuff on Instagram about trauma, you know, people that have had trauma, and your partner, your wife had trauma. My partner had trauma, and he's done lots of things over the years. He's had counseling, he's had psychotherapists, he's done something quite recently, EMDR, which you might know about. And actually that's really helped in terms of detaching the emotion from, he can actually speak about things now without crying, which
Good
is,
for him. So
which,
glad.
yeah, which is massive, but, you know, which he hasn't been able to do all of his life. So, but, and then we had this conversation the other night, and I was basically, and it comes from other some brothers I follow in terms of energy coaching, and to be able to, like you said, to be vulnerable and almost like scream, shout, show the worst side of yourself that, you know, that you don't want anyone to see. But if the person you love is able to be in that space with you without judgment, um without leaving, because that's obviously a big worry for people, isn't it? They're gonna fucking leg it. Um and just be with that person and be a safe support and just be love, then that allows that person that has had the trauma, or not just trauma people, any people, to really feel safe and secure in this connection with this amazing person, and they're not going to turn on their heels and run.
You touch into beyond trauma. Love is traumatic in and of itself, right? It's the most, your partner is the most dangerous person in the world. You're handing them your heart. And you're trusting that they are going to be there tomorrow, that they're not going to choose someone else, that hopefully they're not going to die, they're not going to leg it, as you said. Yeah. And so that's inherently vulnerable, and showing up in that place of emotional intelligence and personal responsibility is important, because it is what Harville Hendrix said. He said, we are inexplicably drawn into the arms of a romantic partner who will, by their very nature, recapitulate our childhood wounding. And most couples, for me, in my experience, and this is part of the reason why we have jobs, is because of the recapitulation of childhood wounding in a relationship. That's what's happening. People are trying to avoid it all the time. And I'm like, no, it's the gold. It's why you're here. You think it's puppy dogs and rainbows. You think it's unicorns and all that and ice cream. It's not. It's for the recapitulation, but it's so painful often. And it's understandable. That's why people do leg it and try to get out of it. I try to get my people to hang in there, because Hendrix finished that quote. He said, we do this for a very good reason. We do this so that we can have a reparative experience. And so we're inviting in our relationship these younger wounded aspects of ourselves back to the table, back for reintegration, so that they can know there's 4 questions that I ask. Am I loved? Am I safe? Am I enough? Do I matter? And people cry in my office for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is when I hit their truth. And those hit the truth buttons all the time. Those are core wounds. And so you'll see them kind of go, all of them, or, I never felt like I was enough. And so this is why you're here. This person, by their very nature, may unwittingly make you feel like you weren't loved, that you weren't safe, that you weren't enough, that you didn't matter. We're here to heal that. And can you both hold space, not for the protective aspects of self that want to war and win stuff, but can you look behind that aspect, that warring aspect, that protective aspect, and see the wounded child within, and recognize your partner for the wounded child within? That's at essence, I think, what you were onto a minute ago, recognizing the wounding. You don't have to be, I always say non-traumatized partner. Is that a thing? Yeah. There's just varying degrees of trauma. And so being able to recognize each other, not for the protective aspects of self that show up, but for the wounded kids that are just showing up there, asking to know that they're loved, they're safe, that they're enough, that they matter. That's the gold.
Lovely. If anybody listening is sort of completely resonating, what's a good first thing that they could do? If they're sat in a relationship now that is not fulfilling it for whatever reason, but they're not ready to give up on that relationship, what would be the first thing that they could do you think?
My phone is usually one of the last they want to pick up and call, right? My door is usually the last one they want to walk through. They'll talk to their friends, family members, colleagues, bosses before they call me. But I think, try to get yourself and your partner into a good couples therapist, where there's hopefully room for all of it to be sort of laid out on the table. You know, that very often, well, my partner is reluctant at best to go, well, you know, that can't be an answer. I'm not going to couples therapy is not an answer. I mean, it can be. I just don't think it's one we can accept. If there's real issues beyond that, then go and get yourself some books on relationships. Educate yourself. The tough part is very often, you know, we're habitual, and we have grooved the neural net, as it were, to react in particular ways. It's hard without someone there kind of helping you out, refereeing, spotting you to say, you know, this is where I think you're going off the rails. It's really hard to do that work on your own.
Yeah.
And so I circle back to get yourself a good therapist.
Yeah. I'm totally with you, but you know, people are resistant for lots of different reasons. But I think what you were saying about personal responsibility, out of all those 5 that you talked about, that's very much front and center for me, and has been for a long time. I'm not perfect, but I find that element of practice easier than a lot of people find it. I'm not perfect. Jesus Christ, no, not at all. But you know, I do take responsibility. Or if I haven't took responsibility, when somebody shouts it in my face, I listen and acknowledge and apologize invariably, and do
You've
better.
seen the other side, though. You've seen the other side of personal responsibility, right? Like, you've seen what it can bring you. And once you recognize it's like a color, you can't unsee it. You're like, no, I know where the old path takes me of digging my heels in, fighting for the victim position, trying to win the argument, all of that shit. You know, love embargo, if he would only, if she would just, all that stuff. You've already seen, you know where that goes. And you've seen the light, so to speak, that taking personal responsibility obliterates all of that by and large. And it greases the wheels towards healing and reconnection and trust. So I like you in the same way. And I'm not perfect, as you were saying, but man, I have more self-awareness around, like, oh, now's a good time. I don't want to own my shit, but it's time to own my shit. There's that part of me that's in my ear going, you don't have to own that. You heard what she said. You can say some fucked up shit now. And I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. I know I'm going to own it. I'm going to own it.
Totally. So when did the book come out?
It was supposed to come out 2/2/22, which would have been an auspicious launch date, wouldn't it? That was the original launch date, but so the audiobook came out at 2/2/22, but the actual book hit the shelves, so to speak, on the 15th of this February. So it's been a little while. It's been doing okay, but you know, it's now I'm a book peddler.
So presumably the usual places: Kindle, Amazon, you know, all the main bookstores.
Barnes and Noble, all of them. Buxton Books here in Charleston, South Carolina is my local bookseller, and I always try to, like, you know, push that and help the local guy out. And they've been, Polly at Buxton Books has been amazing for us. So it's really sweet to see your book on an actual bookshelf and not just sitting on it. It's nice on Amazon too, don't get me wrong, but that's kind of cool.
And in terms of what's coming next for you, have you got any sort of, well, at the beginning I said, I think there's book 2 for you when you were talking about the trauma side of things, but have you got plans for more books, more events? Is there any events that people could go and see you at? Because I know you do public speaking.
Yeah, you know, I just did a big one at the Low Country Mental Health Council Symposium, and so I'm not sure what's next on the card as far as speaking is concerned. That's sort of up in the air. There's a couple different things in the works, but if people want to get in touch with me or see more of my work or hear some other nuggets of profundity, they can visit me on Instagram at Lair Torrent Holistic Therapist. The book is on Amazon. It's on, as we talked about, where our books are sold. And
it's the
I also have my
love,
own,
isn't it? Practice of love.
Yeah, the practice of love. Thanks. Yeah. And you know, the next book I think is going to be, I'm talking with my agent now about that. I think we're going to be expanding this book because if you read the reviews of the book, most people say some version of, this is great for couples, but it's amazing for individuals. And the book is actually written that way, right? The idea is that we would work not on a couple so much, we work on making two individuals better versions of themselves, so that when you come together, that group dynamic scenario would necessitate us being better together.
Yeah.
And so people really like it for the individual messages that they can take into every area of your life. If you think about it, you have a relationship with everyone and everything. It might not be romantic, and the same pieces, the same practices work at work. As a matter of fact, I do corporate talks where I just flip it over and use it in a corporate environment. So these relational pieces help with your relationship to yourself, your relationship in non-romantic relationships, your relationship to yourself at work. And so the next book is going to be, I think, The Practice of Life. And it's going to dovetail on so many of the pieces with new stories and new things that I can bring to the page, just for individuals.
Sounds amazing. And do you have a website as well, Lair?
LairTorrent.com.
Yeah, just lairtorrent.com. Cool.
Yeah.
Before I come on to my last bit, how I always close these conversations, what did inspire all of those tattoos? How long have you had them?
I got this one at 37. I'm 52, and the sleeve is it's a family totem. And
right. Cool.
Yeah, and so you can see there's the birds here, and there's sort of a Day of the Dead kind of theme. This is my wife and I, without our skin, as I like to say.
Okay.
And then this is the Helix training program. This was the Helix logo and all of the things that came from that. And then if you see, there's a skull here with a lightning bolt. That's my boy Jake, my son, my 13-year-old. And then there's one here with birds coming out of it. That's Jasper, my youngest. And so this is really a family totem.
Nice.
From just dreaming it up and the two of us together to the family we have now.
Oh,
It's pretty lovely.
Oh.
Yeah.
I also have a son called Jake, but my son is 23. Okay, so it's been an absolute pleasure. I've learned quite a bit, actually. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you and listening to that wonderful voice. I always like to close these out with anything you feel called to share with the audience, anything at all.
Wow, that's open-ended, isn't it?
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a little piece that I shared earlier that maybe I'll add this. Love and connection can be hard. It can be incredibly vulnerable, and it can bring out some of our most protective aspects of self. And that is at face value, right? That's on the surface. If you give yourself a moment to dive beneath the surface and look at how you're showing up, not what they're doing, but how you're showing up, the aspects that are in you, the pieces that have come here to be healed, then you don't have such a myopic view of love and how do relationships never work for me. You'll be looking at it through a different lens when you start looking at the parts of you that are showing up here for healing, not to be saved, not for romantic love that you see in the movies and the poems and the songs. That's a byproduct of something else, and it's the byproduct of practicing well in your relationship.
Love it. Wise words, audience. Take note. Well, as I say, it's been an absolute pleasure to meet you, Lair. I know the listeners and viewers maybe on YouTube will love it. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.